Sorry for keeping you waiting, friends. This took me much longer than it really should have, but this is the moment you've all been waiting for, part 2 of my eating disorders and trans identities interviews. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, if you're watching this and you're looking at me and you're thinking, what the hell are you doing, Penny, with those headphones? I got my ears pierced yesterday and I'm just trying to not touch them because they said don't touch them and they're very sore. So just pretend I don't look ridiculous. Okay, thanks. So now in today's episode, you are going to hear from Dr. Kai Thomas, who is a researcher from the University of Cardiff. He shares some of the research that he's been doing with his team, looking at eating disorders in trans populations. He's even shared some links with me, which I'll put into the show notes below for any trans people who are interested in helping with their research. So they're currently looking for trans and gender diverse people who are not autistic and do not have ADHD, but who have experienced eating disorder treatment in the UK. This is to take part in a one-to-one interview. Now, I know most of you are listening to this and you've just gone, what do you mean no ADHD and autism? Relax. It's just because they've already done that research, and this is another branch in the eating disorder research tree. You're also going to hear from a trans athlete called Arlo Harris about their personal history of struggling with eating disorders and disordered eating, overtraining, and how that might have been a primary factor in the injury that's left them disabled. H has such an incredible perspective on eating disorder recovery and training and falling back in love with exercise. And I'm really sure you're going to love hearing this story. So without further ado, I'm Penny. This is episode 24. Here's Kai.
I'm Kai Thomas. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Cardiff University. My research generally is looking at eating disorders. So why do some people develop eating disorders and not others? How can we support those people with eating disorders to recover? My current program of research is really focusing on the experiences of trans, gender diverse and neurodivergent people with eating disorders. So yeah, trying to find out what are the specific factors that mean those people are more at risk of developing eating disorders, and how can we improve sort of understanding and treatment for them.
What motivated you to start researching eating disorders in that trans and gender diverse population?
So I'm trans myself. I transitioned like 15 years ago. So when I was 15. So initially, my research didn't focus on trans and gender diverse people, but it's something that I've started to explore more in the last few years. You know, there are difficulties researching an area that you have like close personal connection to, but then there are also positives. So, you know, I do a lot of work speaking directly to trans and gender diverse people with eating disorders. So being able to have some level of shared understanding and experience can be really helpful. And I think understandably, a lot of trans people are quite anxious about getting involved in research. You know, maybe they've had, negative experiences in the past. So yeah, I think, you know, there can be an element of being a more sort of safe person to talk to compared to someone who, you know, isn't trans. So yeah, that's how I got into this area.
How common are eating disorders amongst trans and gender diverse people compared to cis people?
Yeah, so unfortunately they are pretty common. So in terms of like the statistics that we have, around sort of 18% of trans people report having an eating disorder or an experience of an eating disorder at some point in their life. And that's compared to around like 1.8% of cisgender women. And I think it's 0.2% of cisgender men. So you can obviously see the disparity in those numbers. And yeah, there is some research to suggest that non-binary people experience even higher rates than binary trans people. But there's not loads of research in that area, so there still needs to be more work done.
I've seen some stuff about non-binary people having the highest rate of eating disorders, and that's from what I saw, regardless of whether or not they've had any sort of like medical transition. So just conceptually, if you're a person who's like, gender is stupid, that makes it more likely that you're also going to struggle with disordered eating. And while that is crazy, as a non-binary person, it also is a little bit validating because I'm like, see, this isn't in my head.
Yeah,
This is like a real thing that I have not just made up. That is like a real thing that is connecting people in very different places who are having very similar experiences for no other reason than that just is who they are. So I find it super interesting and also
yeah,
really sad.
yeah. It's. I think there are obviously specific factors that increase the vulnerability of non-binary people developing eating disorders. I think we don't really know what they are, um, because most of the research in the last 10 to 20 years or so has um, grouped all trans and gender diverse people together. So they often don't recruit enough people who fall within the different gender diverse identities. So you end up with um, results or conclusions being drawn about the whole group rather than being able to say binary trans people experience this rate of eating disorders compared to non-binary people, etc. So research is starting to try and um, you know, disaggregate between the different gender diverse identities, but yeah, we still don't really know that much. We do know that eating disorders have sort of been increasing over the years. There was a steep increase around COVID-19, around the pandemic, but I think the most recent research is sort of suggesting that it's settling down, so it's not rising exponentially. Um, but obviously, any rise or increase is really bad.
Why do you think that trans people are more likely to struggle with eating disorders?
There are probably several reasons, and the reasons that I suggest there's probably many more, and they probably intersect. So it's more like a complex combination of factors. Based on the work we've done recently, gender dysphoria has come out as one of the sort of the main factors for why trans people think they developed an eating disorder. Um, so gender dysphoria is the distress that some trans and gender diverse people can experience due to their gender incongruence. So the eating disorder can become a way of trying to change the body, to try and alleviate that feeling of distress, and to try and sort of make your body align with the gender that you are. For example, trans men may restrict what they're eating in order to reduce body fat, reduce the appearance of curves. Gender dysphoria is probably one of the main factors that a lot of trans and gender diverse people bring up. Another one is minority stress. Minority stress is the stress that people can experience when they're from like a stigmatized or marginalized group, so such as trans and gender diverse people. So this can mean that you're more likely to experience stressors like discrimination and violence, as well as internal stressors like shame. And they can obviously have a huge impact on your well-being, and increase your risk of developing mental health difficulties, as well as eating disorders. We have also had people report sort of pressure to conform to different body ideals as being something that's really contributed to their eating disorder developing and maintaining. So obviously those can affect anyone, so cisgender people and trans or gender diverse people. But it's something that we've sort of seen come up for all different gender diverse identities. So, for example, trans women describing wanting to appear smaller. A lot of trans women as well talking about wanted to have a sort of more typically feminine figure. So for some people, that means increasing their body fat. Trans men often report sort of the pressure to look more lean and muscular. And I think just, looking on social media, you often see the sort of, trans masculine influencers who are sort of, have a six pack, lean and muscular. And then we've also had non-binary people sort of talking about pressures to align with sort of expectations of androgyny, wanting to appear thin is one of the sort of the key indicators to them of what androgynous looks like. Yeah, I think there are several different factors that sort of come into play in terms of why trans and gender diverse people are more likely to experience eating disorders.
How can people tell the difference? Maybe, I guess for some people it's really obvious, but maybe less so for others, between feelings of gender dysphoria and feelings of body dysmorphia?
There are some slight differences. So when we're talking about body dysmorphia, we're talking about a mental health condition. It's often characterized as an anxiety condition. And it sort of focuses on a belief that a certain body part or physical appearance is defective or wrong. So that could be something that's related to your gender in some way or not. So it could be, part of your face, other part of your body. And these beliefs are often tend to manifest as quite extreme and intrusive thoughts, which gender dysphoria obviously has some overlap in terms of those characteristics. It is an experience that is more focused on distress due to gender incongruence. So when your appearance doesn't align with your gender, so it does tend to be focused on areas that you would typically think of as gendered. But trans people could experience both simultaneously. And I suppose really it's about recognizing when changes to that body part or the appearance will result in relief of that distress and when it won't. So someone with body dysmorphia, if they changed something about their appearance, it wouldn't relieve the body dysmorphia. Whereas for a trans and gender diverse person experiencing gender dysphoria, changing the appearance of their body could then result in alleviation of that distress. So obviously both require different support and treatment.
Can gender affirming care affect eating disorder behaviors, and what might that look like?
Yeah, so there is research demonstrating that gender affirming care can reduce eating disorder symptoms. So for trans and gender diverse people who are reporting eating disorder symptoms, actually going through the process of gender affirming care in terms of, like, it could be in terms of social transition, it could be in terms of medical transition, so gender affirming hormones or surgery. Those things can reduce distress and alleviate eating disorder symptoms. I suppose from my own experience as well, testosterone, so taking testosterone over time redistributes body fat to different parts of the body. So you sort of have body fat that then is stored in slightly different places compared to where it was before. So this can obviously change the shape of your body over time, alleviate distress if the feminine appearance of curves is particularly distressing, then obviously taking testosterone redistribution of fat and perhaps gaining some muscle can obviously, change the shape of your body and reduce some distress. It can also result in sort of affirmation of your gender from other people. So again, from my own experience, taking testosterone, it increased the masculinization of my appearance, meant that when I was out and about, I was addressed as male. It took obviously a while, but it got to that point where I was passing as a man in public, and that affirmation from other people was really powerful in terms of increasing my feelings of self-esteem, and reducing the feeling of shame, and reducing the experiences of discrimination. So I think it can impact both the individual themselves as they see their body changing, but also, the way other people react to you changes. Not always in a good way, but, it can be a positive way. We have, so something just quick to bring up is that we have found some trans and gender diverse people that we've spoken to have sort of reported, they've reported the positive sides of gender affirming medical intervention, but then they've also reported challenges that come with that. Again, for people on testosterone, it can lead to weight gain. So as appetite increases, people eat more food. Some people have described challenges, especially if they've had experience of an eating disorder, challenges with then trying to sort of navigate their body changing in, potentially positive way, but also that fueling some of the eating disorder thoughts that they had before. So I think it can be difficult if people they don't necessarily anticipate some of the changes that could happen.
That is actually super interesting. I know a few people who were recovering from eating disorders and then since starting testosterone relapsed back into eating disorder behavior. I hadn't really made that link before you said it. Is it quite common for people to then struggle when they start gaining weight when they start taking testosterone?
So I don't from the work we've done, I don't think it's really common. So we've done some work where we've spoken to around 300 trans and gender diverse people who've experienced an eating disorder, and a minority of people reported some challenges. I suppose it does probably depend on like when you experienced an eating disorder, and if you're sort of not long out of eating disorder recovery, or you're beginning the stages of eating disorder recovery, then you are more vulnerable sort of relapse into those behaviors and thoughts. But I think it is definitely something people should be aware of.
What support is there for those people?
Good question. So I suppose some eating disorder services are aware of the challenges that come with accessing gender affirming care. I would say as well, some gender clinicians who are working in gender services are aware of the overlap in terms of eating disorders and gender affirming care and trans and gender diverse people more specifically. But overall, there's not a great amount of support out there. I would say the best support is probably available sort of in third sector organizations and charities. I know BEAT, the eating disorder charity, are starting to do more work around trans and gender diverse people who are experiencing eating disorders. And there are some great trans-led organizations who are sort of raising awareness more generally of mental health difficulties. But in terms of specialist support, I don't know if it's really out there.
What other barriers are there to this population of people seeking help for their eating disorders?
I've got a PhD student, Grace Williams, who's working on this area. So as part of her PhD, so looking at the experiences of trans and gender diverse people who are also neurodivergent, who are looking to access eating disorder care and support. So some of the preliminary findings that we've got in terms of that population suggest a lot of people have fear and mistrust around eating disorder services and mental health services more generally. So that could be because they've had a previous negative experience that may have been unhelpful or even harmful. That could be with a GP or with a community mental health team, which then puts them off seeking help. For other people who do access eating disorder treatment, some report feeling like it's not really a safe place for them, that they don't really fit in with the typical demographic of people accessing eating disorder services. Others said that they feel scared to sort of disclose their trans and gender diverse identity to clinicians, which obviously then makes it difficult when, if your eating disorder is tied very closely to your experience as a trans and gender diverse person, and you don't disclose that, then that can make it really difficult to try and unpick why you developed an eating disorder and what can be done to help you. But obviously, if you've had really negative experiences in the past, then you are going to be on guard and reluctant to open up. So yeah, I think generally there's a feeling of being misunderstood, and feeling like your needs are not being met. So I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of barriers for trans and gender diverse people accessing care and support. We need more research to really tell us how we can make that better, and what we can do to try and improve access.
What's the research that you've been working on at the moment? What have you found so far?
The other work that we're doing is looking more generally at some of the mechanisms that are underlying eating disorders in these groups. So my work is specifically trying to understand some of the unique and intersecting factors that contribute to eating disorders in transgender diverse and neurodivergent people. So what are some of the sort of autism specific factors, ADHD specific factors, gender diverse specific factors, and then how they all sort of intersect. We really, really appreciate everything everyone's shared with us, because, and unless people are sort of willing to share those really quite personal details, it's really difficult to try and understand what are the factors that are predisposing some people to develop eating disorders and not others.
What are the factors that are more likely to predispose someone with those various neurodivergences?
In terms of some preliminary findings, we think that sensory processing or sensory processing differences are a factor that could increase the risk for some people to develop eating disorders. It specifically seems to be a factor that is prevalent for both trans and gender diverse people and neurodivergent people. So it sort of intersects all of those different experiences. And it may be that people who are both transgender diverse and neurodivergent have sensory differences may play a slightly bigger role in terms of why they develop an eating disorder compared to someone who is cisgender or neurotypical. So sensory processing differences seems to be a key factor. So another key factor that has sort of come out is sort of that feeling of isolation and difference, and feeling like you don't fit in can invade, every area of your life. I think for some people, their eating disorder can become a way of, I suppose, making sense of their identity. We know that for some people, the eating disorder can become an identity in itself. So it can be a way of um, trying to have a sense of achievement. It can make us feel good if we feel like we're sort of working towards something. So it can be really difficult for people who then take on that identity to actually separate themselves from that. One of the most important parts of the research that we're doing is trying to understand, for people who experience both the trans and gender diverse identity and the neurodivergence, what are the experiences of having those two intersecting identities? Because we know that trans and gender diverse people are obviously more likely to experience eating disorders. We know that autistic people and people with ADHD are more likely to experience eating disorders. But what about when both of those experiences or identities co-occur? What impact is that going to have on the individual, so that we can make sure that when we are intervening and supporting people, we're supporting them in terms of disordered eating or eating disorder symptom rather than an eating difference. So for some autistic people and people with ADHD, they may have eating differences that are not distressing and are not inherently harmful. And we don't want to be going in and trying to get people to change those behaviors when they aren't a problem. So I think it's just like, understanding what is a disordered eating behavior and then what is an eating difference. And I think, I'm trying to unpick some of the mechanisms that lead to those different types of behaviors allows us to understand more about where those lines are drawn. But again, we still don't really know a lot about that. So that's something that, still needs quite a bit of work.
There's not much research really in trans people that's out there, so it's great to see trans scientists taking that role on for themselves, especially now, during a time when trans people are really vilified for existing by mainstream institutions. And people with gender dysphoria seem to be especially prone to body dissatisfaction, and that can often lead to disordered eating or eating disorders. And like I said, around 18% of trans people report having an eating disorder or an experience of an eating disorder at some point in their life. That's loads. And that's compared to 1.8% of cisgender people, which is crazy high. And non-binary people are probably even higher. In an article I found on psychiatrist.com, which I'm going to share in the show notes, they suggest that a lot of genderqueer patients will have eating disorders that go undetected by physicians because they're not being driven by the more widely understood fixations on body shape and size that the doctor expects to see. In the article, Lisa Brownstone, who runs the Bodies, Eating and Emotions Lab at the University of Denver, says that doctors could actually be causing eating disorders in people seeking gender-affirming surgeries. And that's because of BMI requirements. They often lead doctors to recommend calorie-restrictive diets to patients whose BMI doesn't meet the requirements for surgery. And she says she's treated several patients who were hospitalized after following their doctor's diet plans. And that sounds outrageous, doesn't it? But it's not surprising. When I had my breast reduction when I was 21, that was something I was told too. They said if I couldn't lose X amount of weight by whatever deadline, I wouldn't be able to have the surgery. So I stopped eating and I started smoking. And they said smokers were not allowed the surgery either, but I just lied because I was desperate. And I guess in hindsight, that was probably actually really dangerous. But desperate times call for desperate measures. And when you don't trust the people around you to help you, and you've been given a task that seems impossible, people will make decisions that aren't always the best decision. That said, my surgery was fine, nothing went bad, and I was very happy with the results for a really long time. That was until my boobs grew back. Nobody warns you about that. Every time I gained weight, it would go to my boobs, and every time I lost weight, it would not go from my boobs. And it probably won't surprise you, dear listener, watcher, to hear that I gained and lost weight countless times over the next decade or so. And I think the extreme ends of the up and down was probably amplified by the undiagnosed ADHD, because my ED behaviors almost disappeared overnight when I started taking ADHD medication. And actually, me spending so much of last year not taking my medication was probably a big factor in why I ended up falling back into old habits out of nowhere, or so it seemed. I guess it's never really out of nowhere, is it? Next up is H, sharing their personal journey with disordered eating and high level sport. And they mentioned that eating disorders are a bit like addiction and you're never really cured, you're just always living with it. And I wouldn't have agreed with that if you asked me 12 months ago, but my little wobble last year really brings that idea home for me. Learning to be okay is a forever task, and there's always new situations that you need to learn to manage and new lessons for you to have to work through. So, something to think about, and I hope you enjoy the next bit.
Hello, my name's Arlo Harris. My pronouns are they, them. For those of you that would like an audio description, I'm a lighter skinned black person with medium length curly hair. I'm wearing a green top, a silver chain. I've got piercings on my face. I am an adaptive athlete. I have severe and complex osteoarthritis and other degenerative changes, and I lift weights and explore adaptive sport quite loudly on the internet. What makes me qualified to talk about eating disorders in this space? So I'm a trans person and I have an eating disorder.
When did your eating disorder first manifest?
So I think what's also important to sort of acknowledge in this is I'm also neurodivergent. So I have a mixed neurodivergent profile. So I'm autistic and ADHD, and I have particular early on, like when I was much younger, the sensory needs were recognised, and I really pinpoint it. I choked on something when I was maybe 9 and then was adamant I could still feel it in my throat, and basically then didn't eat solid foods for probably about 2 months. And I think if I really zone in on it, that was probably the beginning. I think it first manifested as in a more traditional sense when I was 14. My body weight reduced significantly in that time, in a shorter period of time. There's sort of two predominant things that have driven my ED behaviours in the past. Firstly is gender dysphoria, and a smaller body size has always enabled me to create a more masculine frame, even from the ages of 9 and 10. Equally, from a sporting capacity, so prior to the onset of my disability, I was an elite athlete. So I played what we call it AB basketball now. So we have wheelchair basketball and AB basketball, AB standing for able-bodied. So I played AB basketball from the age of around 10 as well. And the other driver in that was getting picked for sport, and the perception that a smaller, leaner body meant a better performance on the court. So there was that initial experience. I think that was probably more ARFID related. But obviously there's a subconscious level of praise and acknowledgement of changes in your body, and the positive acknowledgement of changes in your body in relation to a body becoming smaller, and then having that same repeated experience as a 14-year-old who wasn't getting picked on a team in a highly competitive area of sport, and then also having that element of wanting to have a more masculine figure.
Is it something that you're still struggling with now?
My sort of philosophy on an eating disorder is it's like an addiction. You are in recovery. I don't think I'll ever live without it. I think we're in stages of recovery. I think it will always be something. I don't remember a time in my life without it. I was also brought up in the Weight Watchers household, right? Like where, I would be taken to dance class, and we're talking like real little now, like 2-3 years old. I was being taken to dance, and that's after the dance class, because it was like, community centres, miners' welfares, those kind of thing. There was Weight Watchers, so I would dance, and then I would sit and have a snack, and then my mum would go into Weight Watchers, and I would sit around watching these women weigh themselves and talk about their bodies in a really negative way, and talk about larger bodies in a really negative way. And these before bodies be placed on literal placards at the front of a room and demonized, and my mum counting points and being able to pick up these little, I always remember the jelly sweets of Weight Watchers. I don't know if anyone's parent was ever in them, and it's funny because they remind me of what I have to take now as hypoglycemic. Like, they look a bit like this, and they used to say how many points it were, and I'd have a parent that would be like, I can't eat that because of the points in it, and that was all I ever knew. I think there have been times where I'm like, yeah, I'm done, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm done, I don't have that anymore. And actually I very much do, and I'm working through a new stage and a better stage, and then moving out from a place of like peak crisis into like what new life looks like, because I just fundamentally believe an eating disorder affects you in so many more ways than people will ever really know and understand.
Do you want to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we've got the superficial things that people recognize, weight. We recognize things around like eating, but then like eating for pleasure and how much it consumes social occasions. And there are like whole social occasions that I don't remember because I was so concerned about what I was eating and the numbers of what I was eating, and then secretly tracking it on an app, or thinking about how I was going to work that off the next day, and how that needed to be equated. I used the veil of sport to fulfill that eating disorder, and mine have never been separated, right? I can absolutely categorically, hand on my heart, say that it isn't. And a lot of what I do now, like the gym, was always laden with body changes and nutrition. They were always in this like horrible myriad of relationship, where actually what me and my coaches, Lucinda Livingston, are all about right now is about making sure that like it's fun first. Like, we're in there because we enjoy being in there, and if we're not enjoying it, then we're either changing it or we're not in there. Like, it should not always be, it does not always need to be attributed, even down to like, I would say like even goals were manifested into like, I knew to train legs, I would burn more calories, I would experience a higher level of energy expenditure if I lifted more weight more often. It was very insidious, and in a way that I wouldn't even have known that I was doing that. Only now, when I retrospectively go out and I really analyze what that was and what that looked like, can I see that. So these patterns of like restriction binge, even though they might not have met the threshold for an eating disorder, definitely emulated disordered eating, which emulates exactly what I have experienced in my life.
You mentioned before we started filming that your eating disorder might have contributed to the hypoglycemia. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I have I'm a rare Pokemon. So I have a few gastrointestinal conditions that I didn't have growing up. So I have something called pancreatic exocrine insufficiency. So for people that don't know, often people know that the pancreas produces insulin, but actually the pancreas is also directly responsible for all your digestive enzymes. So like back in science, the lock and the key, the Pac-Man lesson, where the food goes in and the Pac-Man splits it up, and that allows your body to then digest the nutrients that are in it. My pancreas does not make, it makes 2% of what it should make. So I have to artificially supplement that every time that I eat. I also have a stomach condition. It's called rapid gastric emptying. So the contents of my stomach moves into my small intestine really quickly, which again means that food isn't properly digested. You don't properly get the nutrients from that food. But the other side of that condition is when that happens, it sets off the autonomic nervous system, which overshoots insulin, which then makes you hypoglycemic. So, and these conditions basically only occur. Pancreatic exocrine insufficiency occurs in a few different other populations, but predominantly people who've had gastric surgeries or any surgery to the stomach or the esophagus, which I haven't had. Equally, the gastric emptying is almost exclusively only ever seen in those populations of people. It might say it in medical journals, but they don't see it. It's not something that they see regularly. Like my consultant is like, I've never seen this in my entire career, nor has anybody else that I've ever worked with. And at the time as well, I think it's important to know that also I probably would say I was also abusing ADHD medication, and because ADHD medication reduces appetite, especially when I was a Loughborough student, and I played rugby union at Loughborough and basketball at Loughborough when I was there. And, I was getting up in the morning, training, fasted, eating a banana, taking medication for ADHD. And I knew, obviously, I needed, at that time, I used that medication to support my education, absolutely. But I also knew that I wouldn't be hungry until, maybe 3 or 4 o'clock. I could go a whole day without eating from that medication. And I didn't necessarily always stop to recognize some of the side effects that I was experiencing from that medication because of what it enabled me to do from a restrictive eating point of view. I never disclosed that to anybody. I don't think I ever really fully acknowledged it until I went to have a consultation and with a gastroenterologist about 18 months ago, and he was like, yeah, when your body is restricted and then binged and restricted and binged, and then you add in a medication that's an amphetamine, fundamentally, your stomach doesn't know whether it's coming or going, and it often can't recover. No one will ever know, for sure. But I don't think I think there are so many possibilities of harm that can come from this. And often again, we know teeth for people that purge, reflux and things like that. But we are still in uncharted territory.
Did you ever get any help with your eating disorder?
No. I remember being taken to a doctor when I was small, and they kind of looked in my throat and were like, there's nothing in there. And then it sort of subsided of its own accord, and I just gradually over time brought back in food. I definitely didn't recognize that I experienced disordered eating probably until 3 years ago, maybe not even that long ago.
What made you realize?
I think I read a book or an article or something, because it also when I was 17, there was someone in my friendship group that was that had to have treatment in an inpatient facility for anorexia. So I think that also provided me with this well, that's an eating disorder and I'm not that. So I had this disparity of what I thought an eating disorder was, because obviously at 17, seeing one case of an eating disorder, I was an expert on it. So I'd never really considered. And I think diet culture is so normalized, right? It's so normalized to be on MyFitnessPal, log in all your food, be in the gym, to lose weight and get fit. There was nothing I was doing that would have necessarily made somebody go, you experience disordered eating. Equally, I have never existed in a body that has been always the top end of at my smallest, I've been the top end of my BMI. I am also dual heritage, a global majority. My mum is white, my dad was from the Caribbean, so BMI is innately racist, right? As well, it's not designed for Afro-Caribbean bodies, and only very recently are we seeing any measure to offset that. Even though we know that BMI fundamentally is a flawed measure, but no doctor that I walked into would have ever gone, "Is everything all right?" I would have never hit that threshold for anyone to think. They would just be like, "Oh yeah, they're really sporty, they're always training," but nothing I did would have been perceived as outside of the realms of ordered eating, of normal eating within diet culture. I think what made me recognize it was the hold that it had, the inability to move away from it, how much it governed everything that I ate, the thoughts that I had around food when I wasn't even eating, how much time food and the food debt consumed my thinking. There was like a moment of eclipse, because I wouldn't say I operate any differently. I just didn't realize what dysphoria was. I didn't realize I experienced all these things, but didn't realize the things I'd done to try and offset these things, which has enabled this thing over here to manifest. Because it was never about being smaller, being a size 6, being those things that typically AFAB people are aiming for within diet culture. It wasn't to be attractive to people. It was to be straight, to be as straight as possible, and to be as muscular and as straight as possible. You know, so a big part of my recovery is gender affirming care, because that is the single biggest trigger to my disordered eating.
When did you know you were trans?
I laugh. As long as I can remember. But I didn't know the word. I just didn't know the word. So like, it always makes me smile, because I'm like, I've known forever, but I didn't know until maybe like definitely post lockdown. Yeah, probably like 22. Like, I'd always just been this like, I do gender. I'd said that from like I'd walk, as soon as I was old enough to dress myself, I was in boys' clothes, like to the point where like I had pretty conservative parents, and even they were just like, oh, fuck it, we're just lost with this one, like just let it do it, because we can't do anything with this kid. Funnily enough, I was having this conversation with somebody, and I was like, my little sister is a lesbian. She's like out and out lesbian, like for as long as, like, she's like, she always says that to my mum she had a deprived childhood because she didn't get a coming out, because we all just knew. And there's no coming out in my parents' house anyway. Like, you just bring whoever you're bringing home, being whoever you're being. Like, that's just how it is. I missed the bit. I was adopted to that family where it is all very not conservative. Yeah, like upgrades. But ironically, biological family now not super conservative, but you know, times we learn, we know at the time. That's my motto of life. But she's super like knowledgeable about queer community. Like, they are like my queer elder, despite the fact that they're like 8 years my junior, because they've just like consumed all of the things and know all of the knowledge. As a young AFAB person playing sport, I literally was like, it was so easy for me to be a lesbian. Like everyone was like primed, right? Everyone was ready. Like, nobody, even my conservative parents, like, I'm pretty sure at one point they were just like, lesbian? And I was absolutely adamant I wasn't. Like, and not from a shame perspective. Like, I can remember, I had this really vivid memory of sitting in the changing rooms and being like, and I was on the team with other queer people, right? There were other people who identified as lesbians on the team. Like, by this time we were like, I don't know, 15, 16. Like I say, there was no barrier to me being a lesbian. And I was just like, I am not. And in this conversation with my sister, she was like, well, yeah, because you don't identify as a woman. Like, that's, and that can be like, not that lesbians can't be non-binary people, etc., but she was like, but that's not you, is it? And I was like, no, like, I was like, no, this is what I've been trying to say, like, I'm just not a woman. And I was like, oh, like, there we go.
What gender affirming care have you had, and what impact has that had on your body image and on your disordered eating?
Social transition, I think, was really big. There were things that I like cutting my hair, and I mean, I'd already, like, my dress sense has never altered. Like what I wear has never changed, aside from a binder. Has never changed. I think I'd had those like cyclic moments of being like, you know, hyper like feminization, like over like time. There were points where it was like, and I was like, I'm never fucking doing that again. Like, we haven't got to do that. We'd always land back. It'd be a very short ride around hyper feminization, maybe a week, and we'd land straight back here. So I was actually meant to have top surgery on the 17th of December. But when you're a wheelchair user, there are a few things that need to come with that weren't prepared. Things like transfers, so having to push and I push a wheelchair, which is like entirely like extended chest. I'm not a little prince, right? But equally, I don't want to split my chest open trying to be able to move around, or fall trying to maneuver in a way that doesn't require those things. So I wasn't happy that we were going to get everything in place that we needed to get in place by the time it needed to happen. So we've kicked that down the field to like end of February, March time. But even having that like on paper ready to go, I think makes a huge difference. That for me is the most important thing. I've had some voice coaching. I basically hot seated an endocrinologist about 4 weeks ago. Because I just have lots of things that I need to talk about, like including eating disorders, right? Like I'm not fearful to be told no, or be told that's going to be difficult. Like I think the fear of the unknown is way, way worse than the fear of the actual legitimate thing, right? Because if it's outside and I don't know what it is, I don't know if it's a dragon, a wolf, or a rat. Like I've got to find out what it is so I know what to do with it, right? And I think that has been the most important part of gender affirming care, like to know what it is and actively prepare and actively make decisions based on that. Like I've had to have decisions and conversations that some trans people will never have to have, like within the trans community will never have to have, about being racially profiled. Like that makes up a significant part of my conversations with gender clinics and psychologists, is how will you navigate that? Like how will you navigate being perceived potentially as a black male, and then having to take the time to process what that means and think about that like really in depth, and not necessarily always come up with an answer straight away.
Can you tell the difference between gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia?
I think they're two of the same, if I'm honest. I think it's being able to sit in where the root cause lies. It's about the psychological patterns that happen. And I think so when we look at, does dysphoria drive dysmorphia? Probably. It was easy for me to look into a mirror and go, I don't like my body. It must be because I'm fat. Do you know that scene in Mean Girls where like all the plastics are in the mirror and it's quite early in the film and Katie's like sat on the bed and they're like talking about different parts of their bodies that they don't like. Like I didn't get that in the same way as anybody else. It was just like, I want to be picked for the team, I need to look like this. And also like basketball, hyper masculinated space, you're enabled, it's supported, absolutely. I wanted my jersey to be straight. I didn't want it to go out of the hip. So and the way I had rationalized that because of my experiences in life around diet culture was, it must be because I'm fat. So if I can make it smaller, it won't stick out. So where does dysphoria stop and dysmorphia start, right? For myself, now that I understand dysphoria, I don't experience dysmorphia as in that like my body is too large and it needs to be smaller and smaller and smaller, because I was chased smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And now I look at the images of me at that time. I was the straight I wanted to be, but me with my clothes off still was never gonna be the shapes in the places that I want, particularly in the terms of my chest. I was never gonna achieve that. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I look at that, like me in that moment would have been driven by dysmorphia because what I would have seen would have been those areas really accentuated. And I didn't understand that was what I was seeing. I just was like, it's not right, so it must be size. And it must be weight, so I need to get my weight smaller and then I'll like it. I didn't even know I was trying to land a plane. Because I wanted to the pictures I was trying to look like were of dudes. And I still hadn't brought that into my consciousness.
Did you know that trans people are more likely to struggle with eating disorders?
I know that now.
Around 18% of trans people have had an eating disorder at some point in their life, compared to 1.8% of cis women and 0.2% of cis men.
I'd say it was higher as well, right? Like, in terms of like what is reported and what what actually exists, right?
And then, did you know that non-binary people are more likely to have eating disorders than binary trans people? Genderqueer and gender expansive people report higher rates of eating disorders, 11 to 12%, compared to trans men, which is 9.6%, and trans women, which is 4%. So non-binary people are 3 times as likely to have an eating disorder than a trans woman.
Whoa, that's wild. I did not know that.
Isn't it?
That is wild.
What are your thoughts on that?
You know, I've heard a lot of narratives of like, I get trans, but I don't get non-binary, like pick one. Equally, what you may need from a gender affirming perspective may not be as binary as, you know, masculinization. I know from the conversation that I had with the endocrinologist, you don't know precisely what you're going to get, but you know, if you want full masculinization, like we're like, well, it's high doses of tea or nothing. Well, how do you find that level of gender affirmity if it isn't as straightforward as that? I would also say, in terms of wherever there is misunderstanding socially, there is drop balls in terms of integrated care, in terms of a healthcare perspective, in terms of a gender affirmity perspective. So we're also at that point of like, well, is it harder for those people to access gender affirming care? I can't answer that question. It doesn't surprise me that you say it. I didn't see that. Once you've said it, I'm not like bowled over in shock, but equally I'm like, oh, I did not know that. That
I always think about whenever I read stats about non-binary people. So, for example, non-binary people are also, trans people are quite likely to be hypermobile. There's like a big overlap, but non-binary people are more likely than trans binary people to be hypermobile.
Wow, right.
And I think about these stats and how like there is clearly an actual thing that is happening. That is why I'm non-binary. Like, I didn't just make it up to be difficult.
Oh, right.
Like,
yeah, for real.
There's like an actual, whatever the actual thing is, it's probably the same thing that made me hypermobile and also gave me ADHD. Whatever it is, it's probably the same thing.
Right, for real, right? Like, no one told that 4-year-old kid that was like, I am not fucking wearing that. Like, like nobody told me. Like, if anything, it was actively discouraged. I was still gonna land there, right?
I've got a memory. I must have been like 4, right? And we're going to a wedding and my mum wants me to put on this fucking ugly polka dot dress and I don't want to put it on, and I'm standing on my bed so I can be taller, so I can look her in the face, and I'm screaming at her that I'm not going to wear the ugly dress because I don't want to. And she's like, you have to wear the dress, Penny. We're going to a wedding. You need to look nice. I'm like, I want a suit, but nobody's listening to me. Yeah. And then I don't remember what happened. I don't remember if I ended up having to go to the wedding in the ugly dress or if I won and just got to wear trousers. But I didn't have any nice suits, so if I wore trousers, it probably would have been something really scruffy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like, sorry parents, but I look like a bag of shit. Like, from a fashion sense, because I think there was always this like trying to set a parameter, especially around events, right? Like events where other people were going to see you. Like little Tarzan was allowed to run around the street. Like I was like Mowgli, mate. Like just let him go, let him run around, do his thing. Like, yet then when we were going to events, weddings, dinners, there was this like attempt to try and move me towards something more feminine, but I like, it never did look like that. It looked like someone had tried to move me. You'd have been better just sticking me in 3/4 lengths and a band t-shirt. It would have looked more natural. It looked for. Do you know that? What was that book where that elephant was in a patchwork quilt? That was what I looked like all the time. I just looked state.
It's such a shame because I feel like if they just bought us a nice suit, I could have dressed nice to all these weddings in my nice suit.
I'd have looked drip.
How has focusing on finding that enjoyment in training changed the way you see your body and I guess also your relationship with food?
I mean, I was privileged to be disabled. I don't know, like, Somebody was telling me the other day about karma, and we have got this misrepresentation of karma in the popular media, that karma is like, it's spite. You've done something wrong, karma will come and kick you in the ass, right? That's how karma has been presented to us. And actually, they were talking about how karma is actually sent to us. It's to teach us things. It's to help us to grow. It's so that we can then go on and be the prophet of the next thing that we're meant to do. We're meant to bring good change to the world. Karma is a gift. I got served karma like a smack in the fucking face. Like, karma kicked me in the face. Like, I woke up one day and couldn't walk on my left leg. Like, just woke up one day. You don't get severe osteoarthritis overnight, but karma was like, have it. It's yours to keep. And it's inoperable, and no one can do anything about it. And if they do, they'll have to amputate your feet in like 10 years. If it even works. If they can get through the operation without your feet completely falling apart, then they'll have to amputate them anyway. So, like, we'll just work with what we've got. You know, so I was served that. I'd had 2 major surgeries. So obviously I woke up on this day and thought, you know, oh shit, like, you know, I have EDS, like, I have hypermobile EDS, and, you know, I've torn my cruciate ligament and stuff. So I've had periods of like significant rehab. I've had really high grade ankle sprains from like 12. And I was just like, okay, well, you know, it's weird because I've not actually gone over on it, but, you know, it'll, you know, I have a body that does some strange things sometimes. Let's ice it. Let's do the thing. Fast forward 18 months, 2 surgeries, more scans than you can shake a fucking stick at. An ankle that is the size of a literal, like, 2 fists together. And deteriorating scans. Like, the level of deterioration was like, it's nothing anybody's ever seen. Nobody can understand it. They now classify it as post-traumatic osteoarthritis. You can read up on that if you want to. It's very interesting. It's quite simple. It just means that the level of osteoarthritis just accelerates at a rate that nobody can really predict. And normally it's quite vastly accelerated because it's a response of trauma. So I landed in this place where I really had to face a lot of things, because a lot of the behaviors that I did, that I'm still doing despite a greater level of awareness of disordered eating, by this point I'd arrived in a place where I was working through, when you bring food all into alignment, so there's no good food, there's no bad food, there's literally just food, and you can eat whatever food you want whenever you want it. And in that process I learned there were loads of foods that I used to pedestal that I actually didn't fucking like, but because they were naughty foods and foods that treat foods, that they were on this pedestal, and that restriction made you want to binge them. So I was working through this process quite hard. I was really, like, I was actually really successful in that process at that time. And I still used to walk excessively. I walked injured. I walked pained. You know, I was still doing things like that to offset some things. And I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't yo-yo between all these different sports and going to the gym and fasted and doing 10 minutes of cardio on every machine in the gym and all these things that I'd always done, I couldn't do. So it really made me face a lot of my relationship with exercise, because I'd felt like I'd lost this relationship. But if I'm honest, I'd lost it. And I think that was where I came to this realization, was like, you lost exercise many, many years ago, mate. Like, you lost exercise at 14 years old. That was when I really lost exercise. I perceived that I lost it, like, at that moment, like 27, 8, wherever old I was at the time, I perceived that that was the moment that I'd lost it. But when I sat with it, I hadn't. All I was doing by that point, from 14 to 27, was eating disorder-related behaviours, disordered eating-related behaviours all the time. That was what all of exercise had ever come to revolve around. When you really strip it back, that's what it was. This is an opportunity. Don't get me wrong, there was a bit of a journey. We landed in and around the place after I'd had the second surgery, where I just, and this can happen with osteoarthritic conditions and degenerative conditions. Surgery makes it worse because surgery is a trauma, and your body just like goes haywire with it. And I was laid on the sofa. I couldn't go out. I was struggling to do anything. I'd got to this point where I was moderating, and I was like, what can I do? What can I do? Because I'm sitting here thinking of all the things I can't do. What can I actually do? And I've been given an opportunity to rewrite the wrongs. I've got an opportunity to reset, right? I have an opportunity to literally close a chapter on one book and open a new chapter. If I don't start doing what I can do, I'm just not going to want to be alive. And I needed joy. I needed to find joy in the new version of my body. It's mine. It's gym and it's mine. And it's not for anyone's performance. It's for mine. We were talking about doing high rocks today. And I was like, if I've got a buddy in a wheelchair next to me and we're going to go and do a high rocks for a piss about, absolutely we're doing it. We are not being a gym wanker. We're not about it. I'm not saying that everyone that does high rocks is gym wankers, by the way. But I have to recognize what that does to me. And this is not about my external judgment of anybody that does any of the things that I've said. This is about me. And it's about how I perceive what fitness, exercise, gym, whatever, insert word here. But food doesn't come into it. It doesn't become this part of this higher order, because that's a huge trigger for me. That's how I see it. I don't know that other people would see the inability to walk or the prospect of the inability to walk, depending when you're listening to this. I'm losing the ability to walk in any capacity. To see it as probably the best opportunity that I've ever had to make myself the healthiest I ever have, which I appreciate just probably sounds bananas.
Do you think all your years of restrictive eating and overtraining could have led to the osteoarthritis in your ankle?
Quite possibly. Wasn't rehabilitated well enough. Didn't want to rehabilitate. I don't know why I'm even guessing at it. The first surgeon that I had said if this was fixed when you were 12 years old, this would not occur. The post-traumatic level of arthritis is hard to predict. I had really high-grade ankle sprains. Wanted to get back on the court as quickly as possible. Played in braces for many, many years. Didn't give them adequate times to recover. Equally, with disordered eating, to be not moving and not have the ability to repent for eating meant that I absolutely was doing more on those feet than I should have been doing. My ankle ligaments were torn so much that they were basically just scar tissue, so that the joint had more mobility in it, that even the small bones of the ankle and the foot had more mobility in than they should have. So on a day-to-day basis, they're going through motions that they shouldn't be able to go through. And then equally, when I was having ankle sprains, we were just continually going into this place. So then on the left foot is particularly bollocksed. There's something in it called an osteochondral defect, which is when you go through the range of motion so much that it basically files. You've gone straight through cartilage and it just files down the bone, and the cartilage that is produced, the cartilage that exists in my left ankle is almost liquidus, which implies that something has not formed properly in adolescence. So I'm very passionate now about rest. If I hurt, I won't train. If I feel stiff, I won't train. Like, if I fucking jam my finger in my wheelchair, I'm not going to train. I don't think there's a way that it isn't self-inflicted. Like, it isn't. Did I know that this is what I was going to get? Not in my dizziest fucking daydreams did I think that it would be this. When you play basketball as a kid, they all say, oh, you'll have bad knees when you're older, you'll have bad knees. And there is very much a culture, especially towards the elite levels, like straps, tape, go. Strap your foot to your shoe and play. If you want to play, this is how you need to play. I need you back. We were basically strapping artificial ligaments and then strapping our boots to our legs. When I look back now, I'm like, wow, that was so terrible. And we were kids, right? Even at university, I was 19, 18. My brain was not formed. I did not have the full concept of what long-term life would look like for me. So if I could walk on it and I could run on it, I was doing it.
So I do actually have one more interview that I recorded, but I'm conscious of this getting a bit too long, and I do want people to actually watch it, listen to it. So I'm going to save that for another day. Eating disorders are incredibly common in our community, and if you are struggling, there is help out there, so don't suffer in silence. And also, please do like, follow, subscribe, all that jazz. Share the pod with anyone that you think might like it. And we now have tickets on sale for this year's Sheffield Pride Deadlift Party. So if you fancy lifting with us in September as part of a big gay party celebrating queer strength and raising money for charity, come check it out. This year we're raising money for Sheffield Palestine Cultural Exchange, and I'm going to pop a link to that in the show notes as well. I'll put a link to the fundraiser too, so if you can't come but you still want to help out, you can absolutely do that. Until next time.